323 BC. Babylon. The world holds its breath. Alexander the Great, the man who conquered the Persian Empire, marched into Egypt, reached India, and built the largest empire the world had ever seen, is struck with fever. At just 32 years old, the conqueror lies dying. His generals surround him, desperate for a successor. But Alexander, delirious, offers no clear name. Within days, the young king is dead. The empire shatters. His generals, the Diadochi, divide his lands, waging bloody wars that last for decades. Instead of a united empire, the world is left with fragments. The Seleucid Empire in Asia, the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Antigonids in Macedonia. But pause for a moment. What if Alexander had not died? What if he had lived not just 5 or 10 more years, but to old age? Would his empire have endured? Would Rome have remained a backwater? Could Greek culture have united with India and China centuries earlier? Would the modern world even exist in the form we know today? This is one of history's greatest what-ifs. And today, we are going to explore it. When Alexander died in 323 BC, his empire stretched from Greece to India, covering roughly 5 million square kilometers, an area larger than the Roman Empire at its peak. But size was only part of the story. His empire was a patchwork of cultures, languages, religions, and traditions. Greeks and Macedonians formed a ruling elite. Persians, Egyptians, Babylonians, and Indians formed the majority. Soldiers had followed him for years, but they were restless, weary, and far from home. Already, cracks were showing. Rebellions had flared in Greece. Governors in distant provinces acted like kings. The empire was fragile, held together by one man's charisma and military genius. That man was gone. So, what would Alexander have done if he had lived? According to ancient sources, Plutarch, Diodorus, Arrian, Alexander had clear plans. 1. Conquer Arabia. He had already begun preparations for an Arabian campaign at the time of his death. 2. Invade the Western Mediterranean. After Arabia, he dreamed of moving against Carthage and possibly Rome. 3. Expand eastward again. India was unfinished business. He wanted to push deeper, perhaps even reaching China. 4. Economic integration. Alexander wanted a single empire bound by roads, ports, and trade routes. 5. Cultural fusion. He had begun encouraging marriages between Greeks and Persians, and he envisioned a blended ruling elite. Alexander did not just want to conquer, he wanted to unify. Let's start with his most immediate plan, Arabia. Why Arabia? Two reasons. Trade. Arabia controlled the incense and spice trade, highly valued across the ancient world. Whoever controlled, Arabia controlled the trade routes to India and Africa. Strategic location. By conquering Arabia, Alexander could dominate the Red Sea and link his empires, east and west, more tightly. If Alexander succeeded, he would have controlled a proto-global economy, centuries before the Silk Road or Roman trade networks. Goods from India and Arabia would flow into his empire, enriching cities like Babylon and Alexandria. Babylon, where Alexander had established his capital, might have become the beating heart of global commerce, a kind of ancient New York City. But Arabia was just the beginning. Alexander had his eyes on the Mediterranean world. And this brings us to one of the most exciting what-ifs, his potential clash with Rome and Carthage. Remember, in 323 BC, Rome was still a small republic, not yet the empire we know. It had not yet fought the Punic Wars. Carthage was the dominant naval power in the West. Now imagine, Alexander returns from Arabia, turns west, and sets his sights on Carthage. The Punic Wars never happened. Instead, we get the Macedonian Punic Wars. Could Carthage, with its mighty navy, have resisted Alexander's brilliance? Possibly, but Alexander had already proven he could innovate, building fleets from scratch. And what about Rome? At this point, Rome was not ready to face a giant like Alexander. Its legions were still developing. Against Alexander's seasoned phalanx, cavalry, and tactical genius, the Romans would almost certainly have been crushed. This means one of two things. One, Rome is destroyed early, never rising to empire. Two, Rome becomes a subject ally of Alexander's empire, absorbed into a greater Hellenistic world. Either way, the Roman Empire, as we know it, would never exist. Alexander had unfinished business in the East. He had defeated King Porus in India, but his men refused to march further. The dream of reaching the edge of the world remained unfulfilled. If he lived longer, Alexander might have returned to India, this time better prepared, with rested troops and consolidated power. He could have faced the Maurya Empire, which rose shortly after his death under Chandragupta Maurya. A clash between Alexander and Chandragupta would have been monumental, a collision of two giants. And beyond India, China. In 221 BCE, less than a century later, the Qin dynasty unified China. If Alexander had marched east in the late 4th century BCE, he might have reached China while it was still divided among warring states. Imagine Greek phalanxes meeting Chinese chariots. Imagine the blending of Greek philosophy with Confucianism and Taoism centuries earlier. This is where the alternate history becomes breathtaking, a fusion of East and West, 2,000 years before globalization. But perhaps the greatest impact would not be military. It would be cultural. Even in his short life, Alexander spread Hellenistic culture across 3 continents. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt became melting pots of Greek, Egyptian, and Eastern traditions. If Alexander had lived decades longer, this process could have gone much further. A common language, Koine Greek, might have become a global lingua franca centuries before English. Centers of learning. Universities could have been established across Asia. The Library of Alexandria, with stronger patronage, might have preserved nearly all ancient texts. Imagine if the works of lost civilizations, Babylonian, Egyptian, Indian, had survived. Fusion of religions. Alexander promoted the idea of divine kingship, blending Greek gods with Eastern traditions. Over time, this could have created a universal religion or philosophy, bridging East and West. Science and technology, with trade routes unified and knowledge flowing freely. Human progress might have accelerated dramatically. Could the Industrial Revolution have happened 1,000 years earlier? In short, Alexander might have created the world's first true global civilization. But let's not get carried away. Ruling such a vast empire was not easy. Distance created problems. Communication across thousands of miles was slow. Cultural differences sparked resentment. Many Greeks resented Alexander's adoption of Persian customs. Succession was a constant threat. Even if Alexander lived, what would happen after his death? Could his heirs have held the empire together? Perhaps Alexander could have established a dynasty strong enough to endure. Or perhaps his empire would have fractured anyway, only later and on different terms. Still, even a few more decades of Alexander's leadership could have left the world permanently transformed. Let's imagine the ripple effects. 1. No Roman Empire. Without Rome, Latin never dominates Europe. Greek remains a foundation of Western culture. The Renaissance, centuries later, would not be a rediscovery of Greece. It would have been a continuation. 2. Religion. Christianity spread through the Roman Empire. Without Rome, Christianity might have remained a small Jewish sect. Instead, a Greco-Eastern fusion religion could have shaped global spirituality. 3. Science and progress. Unified trade and knowledge exchange might have pushed humanity forward much faster. Imagine steam engines in the year 500, or electricity in the Middle Ages. 4. Global culture. By fusing East and West early, the cultural divides we know today between Europe and Asia, Christianity and Eastern religions might never have existed. Humanity might have shared one cultural foundation. Alexander the Great lived just 32 years. In that short span, he changed the world forever. But his death was a turning point. Without him, his empire fragmented, and history followed a very different path, one where Rome rose, Christianity spread, and East and West remained divided for centuries. Had he lived longer, the world might look unrecognizable. A global empire, a universal culture, a Renaissance 2 millennia early. It is one of history's greatest tragedies and greatest mysteries that we will never know. So now, I'll ask you, if Alexander the Great had lived old age, would the world have been united under one empire? Or was his vision doomed to collapse no matter what? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Renaissance Reframed, where we reimagine history's greatest what-ifs.